C'est mes céréales comme un cristal. Je sais pas si c'est bleu ou blanc au fond d'un diamant. Plus je suis petit, plus c'est grand. Je vais me retrouver bien passé à travers. Je vais me retrouver comme un fou sur terre. Comme un fou, tout est si clair.
Hey there, vinyl community. I'm back again, and today's show is going to be a little bit of a tribute show to a musician that recently passed away. Those of you that followed my recent shopping video at Altanto Tour in Montreal, I was reconnecting a little bit with Quebecois music over this past month just because of all the memories I had from my time back as a student there. And I was already I had discovered Quebecois music, music from French Canada, when I started school there in 2015. And I was slowly starting to discover there's some really fantastic bands from the 70s, particularly progressive rock bands that were active in Quebec at that time. And I was slowly discovering that music throughout my time as a student there. And this past June has been a little bit of a rediscovery of some of that music and expanding my horizons as far as music from that place goes. And it's kind of bittersweet that while I was going through this and listening to all these records, one of the, I don't want to say genre, but one of Quebec's preeminent musicians, especially musicians that were active in the 70s, Serge Fiori, died. In another bit of bittersweet irony, he actually passed away was now 2 weeks ago, on June 24th, on the Quebec National Day. It was when he passed away at the age of 73. And Serge Fiori is probably one of the most influential Quebecois popular musicians we've had in the last 50 years, because he was the frontman, lead kind of singer-songwriter of the band Harmonium. That was the first Quebecois band I ever discovered when I was studying in Montreal, was Harmonium, and I've been listening to them ever since. I think they're probably the most important band from this era from Quebec, and probably, some would argue, the most important Quebecois band of all time. If you're not familiar with Harmonium, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the band and show you some of their records, because all three of their studio albums are absolutely fantastic. So Harmonium was formed in 1972 in Montreal. It was a meeting primarily of two guitarists, multi-instrumentalists, Serge Fiori and Michel Normandou. And Serge Fiori actually was the son of a musician, of Georges Fiori, who was the leader of a ballroom jazz band back when ballroom jazz bands were a big thing. So he was raised in a musical family, and Serge and Michel were both not only guitarists and singers and songwriters, but multi-instrumentalists. They rounded out the band with Louis Valois. I think that's how you say his name. I'm sorry, guys. My French has been a work in progress ever since I started this channel, and I'd like to think I'm getting better, but I'm still not perfect, so give me a little grace on that. I think his name is pronounced Louis Valois on bass, and that was kind of the core lineup that started Harmonium. And as with that lineup, they recorded their debut album, just the self-titled Harmonium. And this is a really remarkable album because the members are playing, in addition to playing guitar and bass, the members are playing different instruments. Most of the album is without drums, although there's a little bit of drumming here and there from session musicians. But this is when the band still was a band without an official drummer. This is primarily a progressive folk album. They definitely started as a folk band, and this came out in 1974. All three of the studio albums from this band are absolutely fantastic, and each of them are highly recommended, but they're all a little bit different. If you like your progressive rock a little more folk-influenced with the beautiful melodies and the harmonies, this is probably the one you're going to lean towards. But the one that they kind of became much more well-known for was this album they released the following year in 1975. And that was their album, The 5 Seasons, with this beautiful cover art. And I think this was actually the album I discovered Harmonium on. It wasn't the first Harmonium album I owned, but when I was I'd spend some times just looking up unknown progressive rock albums on YouTube during this period, and I stumbled upon this album, and I was immediately drawn to the cover, and I listened to it, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Now, it's still a drumless album, but they increased the roster of musicians on this, and definitely the songs on this album are more epic, more sprawling, more progressive. There's more variety of color of instruments. They're using different wind instruments and things like that that make this I would say, a richer album than the self-titled. So the actual name of this album is Why Can't There Be a Fifth Season? But people just shorten it to the 5 seasons, les cinq saisons, that's how you say it. And each song on the album represents one of the 4 seasons, and then at the end of the album, there's a 17-minute instrumental progressive track. That is the 5th season. It's what they imagine the unknown 5th season to be. But this is also an original Canadian press. I don't think they were they off Celebration at this point? No, they were still on Celebration. Most of these albums have had reissues done of them at some point. But I found, because I had a reissue of the next album I'm going to show, and I found the original French-Canadian pressing to be far superior. So if you really, really care about that kind of thing, I would recommend hunting down the original pressings. But 5 Seasons, just a absolutely gorgeous album. But by far the band's most successful album, the band that kind of launched them outside of Canada at least, is their 3rd studio album that came out in 1976, and that's Leppard. Heptad meaning 7, and it's a double album that is centered around 7 core songs. Now, they added a drummer for this album, and the drummer they added was Denise Farmer, and it really brought a different type of feel and power to the band. And there's so much interesting musical meat on this album. It really is one of those indulgent, all-encompassing progressive rock albums. They actually, a lot of the musical interludes and some parts of the songs themselves have a lot of additional backing tracks done by members of the Montreal Symphony, Orchestre Symphony de Montreal. And just the woodwind playing and the flute playing and everything on all this is gorgeous and a great accompaniment to the beautiful vocals. I mean, even though Serge Fiori is mainly the guitarist and the songwriter, he can really sing. And he has some wonderful vocals on this. The opening main song, Comment Fou, he goes up into this amazing head voice falsetto for some of the sweeping melodic lines. They really break away from the verse-chorus structure on this album. And if you were to listen to one Harmonium album, I would say that this is the one to listen to. It's kind of their crowning achievement. And it brings a smile to my face every time I go back to it. This is actually the first Harmonium album I ever bought on vinyl. Now, this is, again, an original Canadian press, and is this still on Celebration? Did they move labels by this point? No, they were on CBS at this point. Okay, I was trying to remember. This is the original CBS press, but there is a reissue that came out while I was living in Montreal. It came out as part of a deluxe reissue campaign. And that one's pretty good. I listened to that originally. I owned that. And I thought that was a very, very solid reissue. And then I listened to an original and went, oh, well, no, the original sounds a lot better. It's a very good sounding album to begin with. It's definitely, I would dub it a audiophile album. So if you're looking for a place to start with Harmonium, this is probably the one, although the 5 Seasons is also an excellent choice. Harmonium would actually go on to break up in 1979, and there's actually, I think there's 1 or 2 interviews with Serge Fiori up on YouTube you can go watch, where he talks about why the band kind of wrapped things up in 79, and they had done some pretty extensive touring throughout 77 and 78. He just said, the way Serge put it, he had pretty much done everything he could or wanted to do with the band. It was kind of artistically exhausted. He put everything, the musicians had put everything into Le Heptad, and it felt like there was nothing else they could say with that musical ensemble. And I think it seems like he also grew a little tired with the rock and roll lifestyle now that it was a more touring band. And the band had actually expanded a lot in terms of membership. And so they called it quits in 79, but in 1980, they signed a contract to release this album that was recorded with funding from the CBC, and this is Harmonium and Ton. And this was recorded at a 2 nights of concerts, sold-out concerts at the Vancouver, I think it was the Malkin Bowl in Vancouver, so an outdoor venue. They did 2 nights of concerts at this venue, and this was this was in 1977, I think, and released this album made up of basically the entire Leppard in order. Now, the concerts had songs from the previous 2 albums on it, but these recordings were cut just to be, it's basically Leppard live is what you get. And while the sound on this is not nearly as good as the studio version of Leppard, this is actually, the playing on it is extraordinary. There's so much more freedom in the playing of the band. There's these long solo sections, more improvisation. Everything feels a little bit more, there's more room to breathe in the arrangements, and they're really having fun with it. So if you listen to Leppard and you want to experience what that album could be like in a more kind of on the edge of your seat, live, energetic, but also experimental version, like the kind of you'd hope to get at a concert of really good musicians, listen to Harmonium and Ton. It is amazing, and it's not very expensive to find an original of this. You can also, there is a reissue that's out, and I think actually when I was at Turntables, they had the reissue on their shelves. I don't know how easy it is to find in American record stores, but it's definitely something you can order online. However, I think you'll pay about the same price for an original copy, and is this still on CBS? Yeah, Columbia CBS. Yeah, just gorgeous. Now, Serge Fiori recorded one solo album kind of as Harmonium was wrapping up, and he didn't record any other music really, at least any other solo efforts for another 10 years after this. But he did this one album with singer-songwriter Fiori Sagan, and the album is just called Fiori Sagan. And this is a really interesting album because musically, the arrangements are very, very similar to the music you hear of Harmonium. You really feel the musical fingerprint of Harmonium on this album. However, the vocal delivery, and if you look up and translate the lyrics, because of the influence of Richard Sagan, it's a much more interpersonal folk album, whereas like Harmonium was like this big concept progressive rock, like you think of like Yes and things like that. They're talking about these big concepts, big musical concepts, big thematic concepts. This is a much more kind of stripped down to earth recording, even if the musical arrangements are still a little complex. But this is, I would consider this as close to a Harmonium album as you can get without actually being a Harmonium album. Definitely not one you should sleep on. There's a lot of other solo albums from the various members of Harmonium, but I feel like this is really the essential one because Serge Fiori was such a central force in the music and the composition of Harmonium. As long as I was getting those records out, I wanted to talk about and mention some other great Quebecois albums I've discovered over the last few years. And one of the ones I also discovered when I was in Montreal, and I think I wasn't in Turntables, I was in a different record store. I want to say it was a very small hole-in-the-wall shop on Saint Denis. I was in there browsing one day, and there was the store was spinning a record that was a reissue of this album, and that's the debut album by the band Slush. It's spelled like this, but it's actually pronounced the same. It means slush, but it's pronounced the same way as the English slush. And I'm going to try on the pronunciation of this album, Genai, I think is how you say it. This band released 2 albums, and a lot of the members recruited to be in this band, especially for this album, were musicians from the Conservatoire de Montreal. And you really hear it on this. It's very I would say the music is a little more heady than Harmonium. It's definitely more in the realm of Yes and their like Tales of Topographic Oceans era. But I really like this. So I heard this, the reissue of this being played in a record store, and I went to the store and I went, what is this? This is awesome. It's like, it's Slush. We got the new reissue, and I bought it right off the shelf. Now that was the reissue, and finally last month I tracked down the RCA original, and it sounds really, really good. On the original RCA label. And this is definitely one of those hidden prog masterpieces. It's definitely not as well known as Harmonium, but any survey of Quebecois music, especially if you're into the classic rock, the prog, stuff like that, you can't miss out on Slush. And they do have a second studio album that came out a little later. This album came out in 1975, and I think they have another album from 76 that I've yet to add to my collection. So I hope to do that at some point this year. Another great Quebecois progressive rock band that I just kind of discovered in the last year or so is this album that came out in 1976, Pollen. It's a self-titled album by Pollen. And I mean, look at that cover. Look at the back cover too. But this is a band that's, I would say, musically a bit similar to Slush. Although I think this is a little more noodly, but still worth it. It just has a very different sound than some of the other American progressive rock bands that were out at this time. Really enjoy this album. Another interesting one is av'nir, which is even probably more obscure than Pollen, but this is one that that Reddit turned me on to, and it's just one of those. This came out also in 1976. 1976 was a big year for Quebecois progressive rock, I think. I love the cover on this. This one is a little harder to track down, but I think it's on streaming services. And then another band that's very heavily connected to Montreal is Manège. This is their second album. This is an instrumental band, no vocals at all. This was a band of jazz musicians formed in, I want to say Montreal, but I believe this was recorded in Toronto. They have a very prolific discography. They were a big jazz, I would say jazz rock, instrumental, progressive rock band active in the 70s. They have their self-titled debut. They have this album. They have another couple really excellent albums in the 1970s that are worth paying attention to. And this is kind of outside of Quebec, I would say this is not a very well-known band, but you can definitely pick these up very cheaply online. And the music is excellent. I was just listening to this before I filmed this video. Great stuff. And finally, to go back to the folk roots that a lot of Quebecois music comes from, because a lot of the Quebecois music that was popular in the 60s when they were undergoing something called the Quiet Revolution, which is where Quebec society really heavily liberalized. Very similar to what was happening in America, but with different political connotations and with a different culture around it. A lot of the popular music in Quebec at that time was chanson, which was very singer-songwritery kind of stuff. And that was very popular in the 60s and the beginning of the 70s, and Harmonium kind of came out of that movement. But another artist that was a little later to the party, but that definitely came from that tradition, is the Montreal folk artist Paul Piche. And Paul Piche, I gotta say, I've listened to a few of his albums on streaming services. This is really the only one that really connects with me. But this album, À qui appartient le beau temps? I think I'm saying that right. Again, I'm trying with the French, guys. It's a work in progress. 100 days on Duolingo now. So I'm trying to get those silent pronunciations right. But this is a amazing folk album. It's really, the vocal delivery is very alive, the sound quality is good, the guitar playing is excellent, the melodies are beautiful and haunting. The title of this album, it basically translates to Who Owns the Good Weather? Anyone that's lived in Montreal knows that the seasons get pretty harsh, and I bet there's a play on words with this title in some regard, but this is like one of the really, really big albums in Quebecois music. I think people from Quebec really know who Paul Piche is. He's a very popular figure, I think, in like the Quebec nationalist movement. But regardless of your political feelings about Quebec nationalism, I'm not gonna unscrew that jar. you can't deny that this is a amazing album, and it kind of launched him into the spotlight in his home province. And he definitely became a symbol of Quebec art and Quebec music. So if you want to experience kind of the other side of Quebecois music, away from the noodly progressive rock into something that's a little more stripped down and connected to the folk art of that region, this is probably one of the albums you should start with. Paul Piche. It's amazing. Original copies are not horribly expensive. You can pick this up on Discogs for under $20 near mint. So those are my recommendations for Quebecois albums, particularly stuff in the 70s. I realized I didn't really show anything outside the 70s, although the live Harmonium album is from 1980. The death of Serge Fiori kind of just inspired me to dig out some of these Quebecois albums and give them another listen through and talk about why I love Harmonium so much and some of these other regionally related bands that are worth digging into, because sometimes we just let the language barrier hold us back from so much amazing music out there, and we shouldn't do that, because anyone that's into Yes or Genesis or any classic British and American progressive rock should be in tune with some of these albums, because they are astonishingly good. And so I hope this video was able to do that for you and pay a small tribute to Serge Fiori on his passing, because the musical world will definitely miss him. And that's all I have to say. Until next time, Vinyl Community, I will see you all later. Cheers.